good day to you all. My name is Pamela Foreman, and my main purpose for being here today is to discuss homeschooling. The topic of homeschooling has definitely been a hot topic over the centuries, yet I want to discuss with you how it was the precursor to the American way of public education presently. Homeschooling is a term that has been around for centuries, if not since the beginning of time. Children have been learning from home for centuries, as it was commonplace to expect parents to teach their basics of learning to their children, as it was posed as their duty from God. Many parents did not see this schooling as proper education, yet teaching their children what they felt was right and fit for their family was their definition of education. This feeling of what was right for one family could mean how to farm, sew, and cook. And if mathematics or reading occurred, then the parents knew their children would make it further in life. As time moved forward, schools became an important part of society and the means for which all students were taught equally. Home economics, basic reading, writing, and arithmetic. A practice whereby children are not enrolled in schools, but study school subjects at home. The term is used with reference to parents or guardians who teach their children. Homeschooling is not new to the world of education. The reason it is not popular resides in the fact the power of parents to educate their own children went away in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and therefore the concept of homeschooling is foreign to the general public. Many people question, why? What's so wrong with public education? What's so wrong with home education, homeschooling? Well, there are many reasons to homeschool and why parents choose this form of education for their children. But in 1985, a study of homeschoolers in Utah by Gary Knowles, he determined there were 3 basic reasons why families began to homeschool. Here they are. Okay. Education within the family. It's religious, orientation kind of thing. That's what they want to do. Unpleasant public school experience. It happens. And actual or perceived problems in public schools. So with this last one, the parents, were the problems real? Were they there? Or just perceived? Is it more of I want to have my own religious, our own religious beliefs come down on them or my children, and not have the school teach them immoral items? Did you just have an unpleasant experience in public school? Maybe you had an unpleasant experience in public school, and maybe that is why. But these are the 3 basic reasons that were not really discovered, but identified by Mr. Knowles back in 1985 during his studies. When it came to our family and our choice of homeschooling, we spent 9 years allowing our oldest daughter to attend public school, 7 years for our second daughter, 4 years for our third, and 2 years for our son. It was at that point, after having various issues with teachers, administration, bullies, and other issues with our children's education, that we decided we no longer desired to have our children in the public school arena. We did have some very good experiences. Lots of friends that we met, and teachers that were great teachers. But when you only have a few good experiences out of the many bad, it's hard to keep living in that situation. I feel that my children have had incredible opportunities for hands-on learning. We've had field trips, one-on-one time with both parents. There's love, the social interaction, and many pajama days where we just need cuddles. Okay? As they have grown older, their needs have changed, and they are more into having virtual opportunities for school. 2 of my children have graduated and become, I feel like they are becoming successful adults. My oldest is in college and has already earned a position at an elementary school at the age of 21. She tells me she owes it all to me pulling her out of high school so she could learn at her pace and in ways that were beneficial to her. That just makes me feel good. As a high school teacher myself, I know how hard it is to work one-on-one with students as much as we as teachers want to. So homeschooling does give parents the opportunity to teach their children as they desire, along with those one-on-one opportunities. I continue to get backlash when people find out all my children are homeschooled and I'm a public school educator. What people do not understand is the concept of homeschooling is very different than public school, which I will discuss again later. Homeschool is a personal family decision, as Knowles found in his research, a fact that really hasn't changed in the last 30 years. To share with all how homeschooling came about as a term, one has to understand that there are three distinct historical eras related to homeschooling in America, which include the colonial era. There's a period of time in the 1960s and 1970s, the resurrection of homeschooling, and a revolution of homeschooling in the 1990s when homeschooling was becoming more mainstream as parents cited social and cultural concerns more than the pedagogy that was happening in the public schools. James Dwyer and Sean Peters expound on this topic in their book on how homeschooling is considered a controversial practice. Much like I mentioned earlier, as merely choosing to homeschool or even to stop homeschooling causes confrontation with others. At one point in our culture, homeschooling was the only option for children. While it's not exactly called homeschooling, children were taught their family trade. They were reading from the Bible, math as they counted stitches while learning to knit, socialization when they went to town picnics and played with the local children. During the colonial era, though, there were makeshift schools dependent on your location, but the majority of the mothers took pride in teaching their children from home. Parents did need their children at home to help with the chores, and regular life on the colonial homestead and education was on the back of their minds as a merely desire to survive. There was a slow movement of change when it came to education, to where in 1647 Massachusetts decided to make it mandatory that schoolmasters be hired to teach their children. Later in the 1840s, this home education was diminishing as Horace Mann entered the picture to help create a system of common schools which would give equal opportunity to all children to receive an education. This education would be a moral education to build character and instill discipline by well-trained professional teachers who would provide consistent and rigorous academic training throughout the year. The movement also moved the rights with schooling to the children, leaving parents in the dust. This was a massive shift in the educational spectrum, which would spark more changes as time passed. At this point, public education was a realized concept. And just as a fun factoid, there were a massive amount of people, famous people, who were homeschooled in the 19th century. Those people include Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Edison, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, Hans Christian Andersen, Jane Austen, Mark Twain, Charles Dickens, and Robert Frost. Even Colonel Sanders from Kentucky Fried Chicken was homeschooled. Public school education was deemed to be working well, with changes being made as times continued to change. School enrollments were soaring as children moved from home education to public or private schools. If families did homeschool, it was considered a novelty. As decades passed and with the end of the World War II, public schools were beginning to be criticized, insisting that the country's public schools were in fact spectacularly, that's a hard word, failing to educate the nation's young people. There was a spark of Christians stating that as prayer and Bible reading were removed from the schools, so was morality, a concept that Horace Mann desired from the very beginning. This caused an abundance of Christian schools to open as a hope to bring the country back to its roots and what the country was founded on. Not only was the removal of prayer from schools an issue, the demographics of schools began to change. While many white families were not happy with the joining of races in schools and chose to keep their children in the Christian private schools, there was the argument that textbooks were one-sided religiously and politically, and issues regarding credentials of teachers and how children were taught took the interest of state and local governments. Laws were beginning to form in regards to the regulating religious schools, and some states were winning and others were losing. Enter Raymond Moore, a Seventh-day Adventist who had earned a doctorate in education from the University of Southern California. He conducted a comprehensive survey of hundreds of studies on early childhood education's impact. Moore concluded that subjecting young children to institutionalized schooling actually hindered their intellectual development. Moore actively promoted homeschooling as the best alternative when it came to the public schools that were failing. He appeared on radio shows, including James Dobson's Focus on the Family radio program. And with that response, the number of families who began to homeschool rose, including the creation of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, HSLDA, who helps defend families in regards to homeschooling issues that might arise. The association also lets families know what they should be doing and not doing in regards to homeschooling their children in accordance with the state and local laws. With the entrance of the 1990s decade, homeschooling was becoming more mainstream, and parents were quoted as taking their children's education into their own hands. Not only was it the education of their children, but the safety as drugs, smoking, and violence in schools was becoming an unfortunate trend. These were the reasons it seemed, from surveys of parents, that parents were keeping their children at home versus attending public schools. You did still have those parents who were keeping their children at home for the education because of religious beliefs, or they felt uncomfortable to have strangers teaching their children. Others felt homeschooling would lead to a renewal of the traditional Christian family living. While there's nothing specifically wrong with homeschooling, there has been a movement of homeschooling families to receive federal funding to help cover the cost of homeschooling, as well as allowing homeschool children to play on sports teams at the local school. Each state and locality has different laws in regards to these topics. If you look past these issues, homeschooling in general is still criticized in the public eye. It represents a financial threat to school districts. It's mostly mothers who are teaching, and the argument that women have to be homemakers while the men work. Homeschooling families do tend to be larger than most, so skeptics were complaining that there was too much pressure on the mother to get all of her duties done for the day, and she should send her children to public school. This idea was dismissed by many times over by mothers who actually find homeschooling rewarding. So, what have I learned from this study? As a homeschooling parent, one would think that I would already know how homeschooling came about. I did not entirely. Also, this does not change why I homeschool my children. I will mention that I've been on the receiving end of harsh comments because we do not homeschool like everyone else or have a schedule like the public schools. I teach all day long. My children are older. They have been equipped with the ability to complete their work independently, and usually when I finish teaching, they have their own questions. Each night we have 2 hours of school where I can help them, or they can continue to work independently. But my husband and I take turns as well with their schooling. You know, when he's here during the day, he assists them, and usually he is teaching them life skills such as woodworking, electrical, and more. So again, what have I learned from this study? What I have learned from this study is that we seem to be moving back to how we were prior to public education becoming an item. Children were schooled in their home, and that is what is happening as homeschooling numbers are trending up, especially in the midst of the pandemic. Homeschooling could bring us back to our original roots as a country. Second, homeschooling was practically eliminated with the initiation of public schools and has made a comeback due to public school failure. And third, our family is not going to change our minds. Homeschooling has moved from the mother providing the education from the home next to the entire family. It's a family affair. The subjects have changed, technology has changed, and the reasoning for homeschooling has changed. But the act of teaching our children from home, because you desire to love them, and share the experiences with them, and see them grow from their learning, has not changed. Will homeschooling endure the test of time? I personally believe that it will. Homeschooling was a faction of society for many generations, and even though there was a time when it looked like homeschooling was going to go away, it made a huge comeback. And if schooling continues like that since the pandemic began, then parents will continue to make homeschooling a priority, as they will not want their children inside schools that are potentially harmful to their children and their families. I think homeschooling will not merely continue because of the pandemic, but I believe that this situation has given parents another chance at seeing if public education is worth it for their children, or if they desire to spend time with their children and help educate them on their own. But in summary, I believe that homeschooling will be around for a very long time. Thank you.